Hello and welcome to episode 271 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark. I am the Green Tank, and I'm joined, as always, by Kellen the Red Tank.
Yo, yo, yo.
And Neelan the Orange Tank.
Hello. Ho.
I was listening in our warm-up that you guys got together and had a movie date night this weekend and watched the Dungeons & Dragons film.
Yes,
Yeah.
we are both big Dungeons & Dragons fans.
Huge. We rolled D20s, D30s.
We ate popcorn out of giant D20s that the
Status
theater gave us.
Waterdeep,
Magic missile.
Tyrants of the Underdark. We know these words.
Yeah, save all that for the bonus episode, but I just want to bring it up in the podcast here just to let the listeners know how close of a bond we all share. It's not just on the podcast recording itself. I'm sure if I was in LA, I'd be there along with you.
Yeah,
with my...
You were sorely missed.
That's not exactly what happened. You know, Neil was like, Calvin, I'm having a bad time. You know, would you come with me to the D&D movie?
That's not what happened either.
I'm not sure you'd be invited, Mark.
Anyhow, today, for the first time ever, we will be doing a episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. But before we do that, we'll be talking about the games we've played. Kellen will start us off with Circle the Wagons, a Button Shy game. I'll follow it up with El Gaucho, and then a twofer from Neelan as he talks about Roller Coaster Rush and Applejack. Kellen, help us circle the wagons.
You know, I was going to make a joke about Button Shy, but Circle the Wagons also works. Button Shy is a good company name, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah, so why is it a good company name?
Well, don't be rude. We're going to tag them in this. Actually, if you think this is rude, just wait. All right, Circle the Wagons is a Button Shy game. For those who are unfamiliar, their games come to you in a wallet, quite literally, not made of leather, made of some type of plastic. I don't know. I'm not a connoisseur of plastics, but this is a very small, very card game-driven game. And I would say in the Button Shy library, I've enjoyed quite a few of their titles, including Sprawlopolis, In Vito Morte, and there is an Elizabeth Hargrave pretty game that I can't remember. Tussie Mussy, something I never wanted to say out loud again, even though I very much enjoyed the game. Circle the Wagons feels the closest thing to Sprawlopolis, and in fact, they share a few similarities. I haven't played Sprawlopolis in a year or two, so it's hard to reflect on that. But ultimately, you are drafting a series of cards, and on each card is 4 symbols in each corner. Are these in each corner? I don't know. Here, you tell me, guys. How would you describe there are 4 symbols on this card and 1 in each corner? Or
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Each card is divided into 4 quadrants.
4 quadrants.
That's right. There you go. Quadrant.
4 quadrants. Use your words. And the 3 cards that are not in the circle of cards to be drafted, the aforementioned, it's the aforementioned circle. You make a circle out of all the cards but 3, okay? And the 3 cards that are left become special scoring conditions for just that game. And this is the exact same trick as Sprawlopolis, and it's just as good here. And so each card has 4 symbols on it and 4 different regions: the desert, the plains, the mountains, the river, and then symbols on it like beer bottles, wagons, guns, cows, and pickaxes, which I'm sure have better names than what I described them as, but they could be independent, right? So you could have a gun on multiple different types of biomes. On your turn, you will either pick up the card that is where you're at within that radius, that circle, and place it into your tableau, and then it'll be the opponent's turn, or you can skip as many cards as you want to take the card that you really want, but your opponent gets to then take every card that you skipped and add it into their tableau. Placement rules are really easy. You know, you can't do corner to corner. They must be orthogonally adjacent or covering parts of the previous cards. And then at the end of the game, you score for each of your largest region, so your largest plain, your largest desert, and then the special scoring conditions. So scoring conditions like 2 points per mine that's adjacent to a mountain, or 2 points per cow in your biggest group of cows. There are also more interactive goals, like the player with the most beer loses 1 point for each beer their opponent has. So it's this race to have beer, but then have less, right, than your opponent. Or there is you want to have the smallest town, a small town charm. And so for each square within your place, you score sort of the difference between those two. Some of them are confusing and or downright irresponsible, like this one, which is looking for guns in rows and columns, and then the more beer that's also within that row or column, the more victory points you score. So I'm not exactly sure what Button Shy is promoting here. I kind of am, because the card is called Target Practice, but that makes the joke less funny. The more combination of beer and guns, the better. This was awesome. It's counterintuitive that you may want to skip 3 cards and give the opponent 3 cards in a row to take. But there are also many scoring conditions where you want sort of that middle range, where if you score 0 to 4 of an icon, you score a certain amount, and then if you score too many, it's actually bad for you. The only downside to Circle the Wagons is that scoring is kind of annoying at the end, because you're looking at 6 different colors, scoring all of that, and then scoring based on the 3 victory conditions in the middle. It actually, in some quick games, could take longer to score than to play. I would say you're probably not thinking about it if you're playing it that quick, but you do sort of get halfway through the game and go, oh, wow, this is going to be over in 2 turns because someone's going to skip 3 times and then the game is over. Christina and I really liked it. We've run it back a couple of times. Happy to keep it on the shelf, and I think it's really good. I think you'd both enjoy checking it out.
Something we mentioned before the show is I think I have this somewhere. Like, it's the first Button Shy game I believe I purchased, and I just don't know what's happened to my copy of it. But I don't think I ever played it, so I need to try to find out where it is. It's a size that is unfortunately very easy to lose, so who can say where it's ended up in my apartment? But yeah, that sounds great.
I'd heard good things about this, although I didn't really know much about the game and its mechanisms, but I am a sucker for the idea of like a time track game where you can go as far as you want to grab something, and the thing that you're paying is the ability of your opponent to grab more stuff. And I would be a little concerned that, like, in a 2-player game, you would never want to do that jump ahead thing, but I'm happy to hear that there is a fairly strong draw occasionally to jump ahead and grab a card, even if it means your opponent grabs a bunch of cards. That's cool. That makes me want to get a bit more.
Yeah, totally. It takes up more space than you would think for the wallet that it condenses down into, but definitely one that I could see myself taking on vacation for something just a little bit more intense than, I don't know, Baby's First Shogi, which would be harder to take on vacation because of the board and all the pieces and having to teach someone shogi. That is my review of Circle the Wagons by Button Shy Games, a great board game publisher and a great name for a board game publisher, Button Shy.
A recent very, very kind review commented that we cover a wide variety, this is talking about the podcast, that we cover a wide variety of games from the latest hotness to whatever old relic from Mark's youth he happened to have dug out of his closet recently. Now, I only wish that part of my youth took place in 2014, but nevertheless, the game I played, El Gaucho from 2014, designed by Arve Fuller and published by Argentum Verlag, if not actually old itself, though I might argue that a game from 2014 does seem a little old in today's churning board game market, does conjure the feeling of old Euros from the beginning of the 2000s. The art is by Dennis Lohausen, who was also one of the artists on Gaia Project, and more importantly for this comparison, the artist, I believe, on A Feast for Odin. His art has that Uwe Rosenberg pastoral feel that you get from a lot of that style of game. It's very brown and green and about herding cows. It even has a... What's that?
Who is the artist?
Dennis Lohausen?
Yeah, if it's Uwe Pastoral and it looks bad, it's Clemens Franz, and if it's Uwe Pastoral and it looks good, it's Dennis Lohausen. That's the rule I've learned.
There is a picture of this man on Board Game Geek, and I'm sending you the link to him now. He has the world's best glasses, and he's a steampunk operative, Mark.
That's a problem. Yeah,
this man is a steampunk operator.
Look, I've always separated the art from the artist, and I'm doing that here. But no, I would encourage people to check out Mr. Lohausen's picture, although I would just say, sort of shield your hand so you don't see the hat part of it, because I oppose the hat. Anyhow, as I was saying, it's brown and green, about herding cows. It even has this fun little 3-dimensional pen that you're going to construct on the board itself and use as a sort of dice tray. But even that isn't fancy and plastic like you might get today. Just a couple of pieces of cardboard. Totally does its job. Totally looks good and fun and cute. But again, not very new or plasticky or anything. Not a big miniature or anything like that. And the game itself feels that way too, with its simple rule set. El Gaucho proclaims itself right in the box as a set collection game, and that's what you're doing in it. The way it works is that you'll populate a number of rows with these cow tiles that shows cow of different suits, different colors, each with a value from 2 to 12. And whoever the start player is on a turn is going to roll a bunch of dice into that 3D pen that I mentioned earlier on the board. And then the players are going to take turns selecting 2 dice from the pen and taking actions. So in a way, sort of like a Grand Austria Hotel where you're drafting dice to take actions. So the main action that you're going to be doing in this game is claiming the cows. Again, it's a set collection game. And the way you do that is very simple. If you want a cow that is valued 5, you can use a 5-pip die and place one of your meeples on it to claim it. So you use a 5-pip die and claim that 5 cow. If you want one that's a 10 value, then you can use a 6 and a 4, for example, to claim it. So that's the main action. And then at the end of any round where all the cows in a particular row have been claimed, then you're going to add all those cow tiles that you have claimed into your personal tableau, into your personal set collection with one important rule. So say you get your first gray cow and it's, let's say, a 7. Whatever the second cow that you get in any color are going to dictate if the row needs to keep increasing or decreasing. So again, if I have a 7 gray and then the second gray cow I get is a 10, well, now all subsequent gray cows that are going to be added to my row can only increase because I start with a 7, I went up to 10, so that means they have to keep increasing. If I get a cow that breaks that rule, I have to sell all the previous cows of that color first and then start a new row. And the way that works is that you multiply the number of cows that you have by the highest value cow. So if I have a 7 and a 10 and a 12 gray cow and then I need to sell them, that's 3 cows multiplied by the highest value cow, 12 in this case, for 36 points. That's how 90% of the scoring works. It's the number of cows times the highest value cow. The added spice is in addition to using the dice to reserve and to add cows to your sets, there are other spots on the board where you can use your dice. There are different places where you can spend dice to lay your meeples for powers that you can trigger on subsequent actions. So, for example, there's a spot that you can use 5 value dice to place a worker, and then on a subsequent turn, you can pull that worker from the board to steal a cow from an opponent's row, which is the only real bit of take that in this game, and one that is thankfully not used very often, but when it is, it's a very spicy move and sort of ratchets up the tension. There are other spots on the board that allow you to break the only add cows to your line that are either increasing or decreasing, so you can sort of like spend a die to put a worker on that spot and then pull them off when you're taking a cow, and you can put them right in the middle of your line, of your set collection, without having to adhere to that increasing, decreasing rule that I mentioned earlier. It's not an airy game. It's not super light, but it is light, and it moves at a pretty good clip. I think it says 60 minutes on the box, and that seems absolutely right. And for that 60 minutes and that small rule set, you get a bunch of fun decisions and a game where you need to stay somewhat engaged with what your opponents are doing. This is not like an intense, negotiation or anything like that game, but it's also not a multiplayer solitaire thing either. You don't need to watch everyone's moves the entire time, but you do need to pay attention to which rows are about to fill up and what colors your opponents are going after, and decide if you need to jump on a color of cow that maybe you don't necessarily need, but that would hurt your opponent if you got, or if you yourself need to hurry up and force a sale of one of your rows because it's getting long and you know that someone is going to start targeting you because it's getting a little out of hand, and they know that if you score that row of 6 cows, you're going to get some like crazy score. I made a joke about this game being an old game from 2014, and that's partially because I assume this game, based on looking at it and the rules, was closer to 2004 than 2014 before I looked up the actual year, but I say that in a good way. This is like a super solid throwback, quick, easy family level Euro that isn't going to blow you away or be your favorite game, but it's one that I can definitely see myself always happy to play. Again, the rules are really simple, and it's not like you have that dread of, oh my gosh, I've played this game, but now I've got to re-remember it, or I need a rules refresher. This is a game where I imagine, a year after playing it, if I played it again, I would get the rules pretty quickly. So yeah, definitely enjoyed my play of it. That is El Gaucho by Arve Fuller and published by Argentum Verlag.
And if you're excited about this game, just remember to hold as much of that excitement in as you can before you look at the imagery of it on BGG.
I think it looks charming.
The cover?
Okay, the cover less so.
All I can imagine is Mark as the cowboy on the
This is the same designer as Scharferschoten.
Oh, is it? I didn't even know that.
Are we
What do
talking
you guys
about
think now, Kellen?
the designer of Scharfscharten?
Yep.
The Pepper game? Oh,
Pepper
wow,
game.
that's a good game.
There you go.
Now
I'm
Kellen's
confused.
intrigued.
Yeah, I would say people should do like a twofer. Do like a game night of El Grande then El Gaucho. Why not? You can use the meeples from one for the other and just have like a continuation of the story. Anyhow, Neelan, tell us about your games.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about Roller Coaster Rush. This is a review copy that was sent to us by Pandasaurus Games, and it's designed by Scott Arms. I actually didn't realize this until I looked it up right before we started recording, but this is a re-implementation of an older Scott Arms game called Coaster Park. I don't know how much it shares with that game, I mean, aside from the premise, which seems largely the same, but the components are pretty different, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The premise of what you're doing in Roller Coaster Rush is you are building a roller coaster. And this is a fully realized physical roller coaster. You have pieces of plastic track, you have a huge ramp at the top, you have little mini ramps, curves, bends, and a large part of the game is dropping your marble at the top of your roller coaster and seeing how far it gets, how many sections of track it clears. You're doing that, A, because whoever clears the most flags, every section of track has a number of flag points at the end of the game, the very end of the game, that person is the winner. And along the way, as you're clearing sections of track, that's how you get money. So the process of playing this game is bidding on cards in front of players in order to take a section of track from them. It's a blind bid. Whoever gets the most money takes that section of track out of someone else's coaster and adds it to theirs, which A, kind of sucks, because if you have a design section of your coaster you're kind of into, it's only moments away from being potentially stolen by another player. But I almost don't even want to talk about this game for too long, because the main frustration I had with this, I mean, the premise I thought was neat, but it barely functions in a couple of ways. The tracks are made of kind of that thin plastic that you usually make board game inserts out of. They're just like very thin, hollow plastic tracks. And the way that they connect to each other kind of leaves enough of a little gap from the connection from one track to the other that it slows the marble down enough that it doesn't clear sections of track that you think it really should. And where this has got the most egregious, there's one section of track which is like the highest hump effectively. And if you put that right in front of the starting ramp, the marble doesn't clear it like 90% of the time, which based on my, I would say, fairly good knowledge of physics means that that's never going to be cleared at any point anywhere in the track. So that's just straight up garbage as far as I'm concerned. I didn't find like the mechanics of the game particularly compelling. I was very annoyed anytime people stole tracks from me. You end up just wanting to build the most boring roller coaster with a lot of just flats and no inclines in it. And that just kind of deflated everything I wanted from this, which is kind of like a fun bidding game with a toy factor presence, which could have been good had it worked, but it doesn't.
Okay, but is it not your fault when you get got by Scott Arms?
I mean, yes. At this point, it absolutely is. It is this, it's kind of like the dumb cliche about like insanity and expecting a different result. And I'm just like, why do I keep doing this to myself? I have nothing more to say about Roller Coaster Rush.
I have to say that you mentioned that this is a re-implementation of an older game, which is, I guess, Coaster Park, as you, I think, mentioned. And I'm just going to be frank here. The rating for that on BGG is a 3.6. And I was wondering, why would you re-implement a game that was so poorly reviewed? So I dove into the comments on this, and all the low comments, and there are a lot of them, as you might expect, are about things not working.
Well,
the
there
track
you go.
Just doesn't work. So it's pretty crazy that like a game that, first of all, is reviewed so poorly, and it seems like, okay, yeah, it got reviewed poorly, but okay, this is what we need to fix. Everybody's saying that the track doesn't work, so maybe we have something here, but let's just get the track right. And then for you to say that the track still doesn't work is crazy.
I'm just noticing, and this is hilarious, that Coaster Park had loops in it, which immediately just like blows my mind. Because like, yeah, I totally get why that didn't work, because it barely functioned with the boring hills and curves as are in Roller Coaster Rush. But anyway, that's Roller Coaster Rush by Pandasaurus Games. I also wanted to talk about Applejack, which is an Uwe Rosenberg game published by the Game Builders. Mark and I played a game of this on Board Game Arena. So, in the digital implementation, with a lot of the bookkeeping taken care of by BGA. So, bear that in mind. But Applejack is a game about placing hexes in like a little hex grid. And each of these hexes has two components to it. A number of apples on them, which you're going to be scoring at regular intervals based on your biggest connected area of apples. So once you pass a certain point, you'll score the red apples. You look at your biggest area where you have, say, 5 red apples, and you'll score 5 honey. Honey is also the currency in the game that you can be using to buy these tiles, because at the edges of each of these tiles are beehives. And when you connect 2 beehives together, you score as much honey as the lowest number. So there's kind of 2 simultaneous games happening here. Are you going to be scoring based on lining up honey at the edges of these hexes, or are you going to be scoring these contiguous groups of apples? There's also a third scoring, which is like blossoms, which you can sort of do at regular intervals. But one of the things I thought was neat is the game demands that you get better and better areas as the game progresses, because your proceeds from the apples decreases from round to round to round. And more than that, any type of apple, of which I think there are about 6 or 7 that you score at the end of the game, as long as you're in the positive on that, you're going to be getting a huge bunch of points just for having varieties of different apples. So very simple tile placement game, a very simple to read, I can see 3 turns ahead of now what I'm going to be able to pick up on my next turn, so you can kind of plan ahead, mapping out your little spatial puzzle. Very satisfying, has a little bit of that patchwork feel of balancing your scoring versus balancing your economy. I like this a lot. Mark, what did you think about Applejack?
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot as well. I know that you said in our sort of warm-up before the show that you enjoyed it so much that you're considering getting your own copy, your own physical copy of it. And I get that because, after our game of it on BGA, I've played it now a couple more times on BGA, and I've enjoyed every play. The thing that, and we talked about this as well, the thing that sort of would concern me about the physical copy is that there is a lot of intermittent upkeep that you have to do. You mentioned that you will be scoring these groups of apples at a very regular clip. So like you'll be basically between most people's turns, there will be some like payoff for the number of apples you have. And I would be a little concerned as to how tedious that would get. That is sort of also commingled a little bit by the fact that our very own Mr. Delicious, I saw, gave this game a middling to negative review and said that didn't really enjoy it, which again surprised me based on how much we enjoyed it. So I wonder if his take on it stems from the fact that he played the physical copy. But I would not turn down a game of this just because of how much I've enjoyed the digital implementation.
I think that would definitely be my biggest concern, which is to say that, at the end of every turn, you're practically scoring 1 color of apples, which means you need to be recalculating that. And, I don't think it's that tedious, like glance at your board and figure that out, but you're checking that, and then you're adjusting a score track and blah, blah, blah. You're doing all of these things practically at the end of every single turn, which definitely seems like that could be rough. But I definitely liked the puzzle of it. It reminded me a little bit of the things that were appealing about Calico, for example, where your grid is sort of slowly filling up and you're just like, oh man, I just need to do one more thing. I just need to like hope that I can fit this into the puzzle, but not nearly as restrictive as that game felt. So yeah, I enjoyed that.
It's a pretty unique theme.
Definitely. And it also is quite lovely, talking about Uwe games that have gorgeous art. I think that this looks quite nice.
It's the first serial-based theme I've ever seen in a board game.
That is Applejack by Uwe Rosenberg and the Game Builders.
Before we move on to our unepisode, just a quick note, and I mentioned this earlier in the episode, that we got a couple of really, really nice reviews during the course of the week. So I just want to thank people for doing that. It always, again, helps us gain listeners and gain more attention. And also, on a personal note, and I think I speak for everybody when I say this, just brightens our day whenever those reviews pop up. So it really means a lot to us. Thank you to everybody who's already done it. And if you've got a couple of minutes and haven't done so already, would really encourage you and be grateful if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you found this podcast. And now on to the unepisode. Now, I know what you're thinking, or maybe saying, if you talk back to this podcast. And if you talk back to this podcast, I'd love to know more. But you're saying, what is an unepisode? I've listened to hundreds of podcasts in my time. I've never heard of an unepisode. I'm used to listening to a bunch of episodes of podcasts. What are these guys doing with an unepisode? Well, here's the thing. Usually, we plan these episodes months in advance, to give us
strict
proper
editorial calendar.
Yeah, right. We come up with a topic. We do in-depth research, hours and hours, if not days of research. We submit our research to our editorial staff. They go over it, get back to us. We'll follow up with like the latest goings on in whatever topic we're talking about, and then we'll present it on the show. So it's a very intense process. I know it doesn't sound like that. We make it sound very, fluid and easy.
Effortless.
Effortless. That's a better word. But it's a rigorous thing we do here, almost like academic journalism. That's a much more accurate term. So that's what we usually do. But this time, we're trying things a little different. We are trendsetters. We are
visionaries.
Visionaries. Good God, you're here with everything I need, Kellen, as always. And so we are going to try to turn that method on its head. And we're going into this episode cold. Instead of coming up with a question that you have for us and answering it before you even knew you had it,
Yeah, we share knowledge, right? Truth.
Right,
bombs.
exactly.
Yeah.
We get a sense for where the board gaming community is, and we sort of in advance know what they're going to be asking, and we answer that question. But now we are going to be the ones asking the questions. So what we're doing on this episode is, instead of answering a question, we're going to be asking questions to you. So questions we have about the board game world, the board game hobby, our experiences in the hobby, we're asking them to you and wanting to know what you have to say, what your answers are on these topics that befuddle even us, again, who put in so many hours of work on this thing. We have questions that we're presenting to you. So let's get into it.
Okay, so here's what I have off the top of my head, which is that I am now slowly acquiring campaign games that I am abandoning or am done with. Simplest example, I have Frosthaven now. What do I do with Gloomhaven? Gloomhaven has stickers all over it, it has marks all over it. It's hard to like sell to someone, but it's quite an expensive thing. It's a weird thing to just give away because what is the right context for that? It's a weird thing to sell. On top of that, I may be moving on from Oathsworn just by virtue of the fact that my group was much more interested in playing Frosthaven, and that's not something I can see myself going back, or will I? Maybe I will, you know? What do you do with these big campaign boxes that are harder to move on from?
Burn them. Easy money. Well, actually, yeah, the whole thing is we're not supposed to answer the questions because this is the opposite of what we would normally do, but we're going to maybe answer some of the questions.
Yeah, I think our journalistic tendencies are too strong, so we feel like
it's too avant-garde to not answer them. But we do want your answers, which
Yes.
you can submit at either boardgamebarrage@gmail.com or in our Facebook group or on our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Neelan, you've run out of space under your bed for your inserts and in the bed,
it.
as we know, and you're now looking for, can you just throw them away, right? Or are you concerned about like recycling?
No, well, yeah, there's just something that feels really wrong about doing that. Like, it just kind of feels like if I put in the work, I could find a good home for these. But like, it's just such a hard thing to do.
What about the classic shadow box, the map thing that people do with these legacy games? You ever heard about that?
Yeah,
kind
no,
of thing?
totally. Like your Pandemic Legacy campaign.
Yeah.
I don't think that the Gloomhaven map is that spectacular in that regard. You know, it just looks like a map. I mean, that's a bad looking map. Like I could probably put that up if I really wanted to, but I'm still left with like a giant box, you know, and wooden inserts and all sorts of goobies.
I think you could give away or sell the inserts or whatever. I think there's a market.
Yeah,
for
that's
but-
probably true. There's definitely stuff in there I could, but it's just like, I just wonder, is anyone gonna want like a used Gloomhaven campaign? I just can't imagine.
All right. So my first question, and you know, this is inspired by 10 years ago what I would post on Reddit, you know, as a board game newbie, but now as a board game visionary, I can't ask these questions out loud, but here we are. No, I want to know what products. So here's the thing. I like buying things. Okay. That's why we're all in board games. I like buying things. Okay. Right. What ancillary products have you bought for your board games that have A, actually been worth it, and B, help facilitate the playing of more games? So for example, it's like, I want to buy painted minis for some of my games, like pay someone to paint it, but then I'm like, oh, I don't know how to store this. Like, then I need all that, like, foam core or whatever. Oh, I want to buy inserts, but then I have to, like, set up the insert, and that takes, like, 4 or 5 hours or whatever in the wrong context. Like, is a board game table actually going to lead to me playing board games more? You know, I know a few years back, I bought one of those 6-sided chess clocks, thinking that I could speed up Neelan and Christina, but it didn't work. And it did not lead to an increased playing of board games. So the question is, what products have you bought for board games that for whatever reason have sped up your experience? I feel like inserts is such an easy one, but like I've never found the right brand that I'm into, or they're super heavy. I don't know. Have you guys have any products that work for you?
Well, first of all, it's funny you mentioned that die-shaped chess clock, because I've been thinking about that recently and just how I think that would improve like any game. I just love the idea of something like, I was thinking to myself, look, what if I always played with that clock and had a rule where like the slowest player couldn't win or something like that. Just something like that to mix it in, because I just think that would help. But to answer the rest of your question, I don't actually know. I'm actually pretty curious to hear the answers on this too, because I have some games that have inserts. I have a dice tray that I never remember to bring out in games that need dice. So whatever. I always feel like that's such a luxury item that is going to make things like feel better, but I never even remember to use it. And I don't know if like inserts, I mean, obviously a good insert feels good, but I don't know if it makes me want to play more. Like, I would be very curious to hear if anybody has any strong opinions on things like this.
I will definitely say that there are games for which the inserts are borderline necessary, and Gloomhaven and Frosthaven come to mind.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I'm curious as well. People that have these specific purchases, and like the one that comes to mind, for example, is Iron Clays, where it's like, okay, you're going to use these for all games that use money. How often does that bear out? How often are you actually using them? You know, like I'm very interested to know, like, when people make these extra purchases, like how often they end up actually using them.
Oh, see, actually, that's one thing that I have used my Iron Clays from the Brass games for games that need money that don't come with money, and that has been nice. Cool. So I will say that's one thing where an ancillary product has helped my enjoyment of a game for sure. My question is another sort of like, as Callan called it, like a question I might have asked on Reddit a couple years ago, is what are some good miniature games that are good for people who don't typically like miniature games? So I will say that I've noticed recently when I do research on a game, like if there's a math trade or something, or I'm looking to make a trade and a game will come up that I'm not familiar with, if I see that it's a miniatures game, I pretty much downgrade it instantly, even more than I would downgrade other genres of games that I don't typically like a co-op game. Like, I find myself, if there's a game that's a co-op, I'll dock it a point in my mind just because I don't really generally love co-op games in general. Miniature games is even more stark. I'll dock it even more. And one thing that sort of brought this to mind is that I recently traded for a game called For What Remains. Neil and I had a conversation about this at Dice Tower West when he noticed the box on my shelf.
This is one that I often ask all the time. Well, I have not actively pursued, but I'm also actively curious about it. And you know, it's part of what I've spoken about with in the context of stuff like Undaunted, and the reason I picked up For What Remains, which for what it's worth is more chits than miniatures, but is again like trying to capture like that war gamey feel. Right. Is exactly that.
Oh God, Nealon! Oh, God damn you, Nealon! Are you real? This is just so Nealon-like to actually. Mark opens up, says he doesn't know what the is going on. He got a miniature game. He's excited about it. And you Nealon actually him?
Yeah.
Typical Nealon.
That is, yes. Thank you, Callan. Here's the thing. I don't know that there is a good answer to this. I would be desperate.
Well, I'm not asking you.
I'm desperate to hear what the people say. Because, like, I just think that war games are so specific. And I don't think there's anything that's going to satisfy on both fronts. But I would love to be proven wrong about this. I remember at some point, I think it was like, John Cloud is telling me about some game that uses Warhammer miniatures, but through an alternate rule set that's more modernized and streamlined. And I'm sure stuff like that exists, but I have not dug into it through any like capacity.
And to clarify, now that I'm remembering that you have mentioned that For What Remains isn't actually a miniatures game, it's more of like a war game. But I think it's supposed to like evoke that whole 100% minis like war game on a map thing. And that's what I'm sort of like talking about, like the war game mini line of sight sort of deal games.
I thought these were separate genres, war game and miniature game. So you guys are blowing my mind right here with this nerd talk.
Well, I mean, so that brings up my second question, which is basically that. I like historical games and I like some of the war games that I've played, but I would be interested in hearing about some like what might be considered modern classic war games, but like traditional war games that I should maybe try. There are modern classic quote-unquote war games like the Undaunted series, but I'm talking about more of like the sort of like the throwback feel. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be Hex Encounter, but something like that with some modern sensibilities that people would recommend for somebody who is willing to try something that is maybe a little, forgive the pun, daunting, because I'm happy to have the historical part of it carry me through. Are there modern classics that you would recommend? Is something I'm curious about.
Does a war game, and this is not a question I care the answer to, does a war game have to be historical to be a war game? Is that what we're talking about?
No.
Or you can have a fictional war game?
Yeah, because Warhammer is the de facto.
But isn't that a miniatures game?
It's a miniatures war game. Yeah, I mean, I think they are.
These are the same.
Subsets of
World
the same
War
genre.
II,
I would say what
War
I'm looking
game?
for in that question is the game that is steeped in historical conflict.
And you
Like,
get
I'm not
miniature
looking for
historical war games for sure.
Yeah. But I'm talking about like more hex encounter, like
Sure,
the old
sure.
school, like very boring looking. Like that's not what I want. I don't want the like 1970s Avalon Hill, 1,000 little cardboard chits thing. I'm looking for like a modern take on that.
There was a Boston Tea Party joke somewhere buried in the steeping, but I couldn't find it because I don't know what conflicts happened before or after that.
In a similar vein to like a genre that I didn't know that I had any sort of real curiosity for, but I'm hearing a lot of people talk about Alice is Missing as like a good entry point into tabletop role-playing games, and I kind of have loved the idea of the indie role-playing game revolution, as it were, and I'm very curious to just hear which games are in that vein. So something that's not like a Dungeons and Dragons, that's something closer to maybe a mystery game in the way that Alice is Missing is, that is also like similarly one-shotty. I don't want this to be a campaign game, see former question, I suppose. I want it to be something that I can sort of come in, get out a good experience out of, and then
More of a one-pump man.
yes, thank you, Kellen.
I have to say,
Efficient.
as a person who is steeped, to use that word again, Callan, you can throw in the joke in now. Go ahead.
The Boston Tea Party?
Perfect. Great. Hilarious. But as a person who has played a lot of role-playing games in their past, I have to say that I haven't played one in years now, decades now, but I don't really have an inclination to play them. Although, as you mentioned, Neelan, some of our listeners played over Discord game of Alice is Missing, which I have to admit that I didn't really know much about, but they were talking about their game after playing it and talking about how much they enjoyed it. And so I did a little research into it, and now I would be super into trying that out. It seems very interesting without having some of the pitfalls being too strong a word, but things that make me not really interested in playing a role-playing game, being the role-playing, like theatrical nature, being the campaignness of it. Alice is Missing seems really, really interesting. I would be 100% down to play it.
Yeah, I wonder what Kellen's reaction to even the thought of like trying to do this as a foursome is. But the premise of Alice is Missing, if you don't know Kellen, is like literally the entire thing he plays over text. So there's no live in-person role playing. It's purely like text conversations that happen over the course of 90 minutes and then that you're done. So it's like, it is very intriguing just from the context of someone that doesn't love the idea of performative role playing, like having to embody a character per se. So yeah, I'd love to hear more stuff in that vein.
That sounds cool. I mean, it's like, I don't know, I guess the closer it gets to like interactive like theater, the more I'm okay with it. And I don't know what that axiom is because I know nothing about RPGs. So, all right. So this is one that is more of a softball. These guys want game recs. I'm looking for the deeper meaning, typically. I had to wait for Mark to laugh. That's why there's a pause there. Normally it's faster. No, I think that one of the things that I have noticed is similar to how I consume like entertainment, like movies and books. I find that my ability and desire to play heavy games waxes and wanes with how busy I am in my personal life. So I'm curious, and what that means is when I'm in a busy period of my life, I am not playing the heavier games that I want to play. For example, I've had Barrage on my shelf of shame for like a year now in shrink wrap, and I know that I will like it because of all the boxes that it checks, and often I'll be like, this is the weekend I'm going to play Barrage, and then it gets to Thursday night or Friday night, and I'm like, this is not the weekend that I'm going to play Barrage. And that extends itself even to conventions, where I often will hesitate to get into defense of the Procyon 3 or whatever that was.
Which I bought a copy of, by the way, so we could totally do that.
Oh, God. So the question is, what strategies do you have for sort of like penciling in and going for it on heavier games? Like, do you schedule whole nights around these heavier things, or how do you sort of get yourself over the hump for the heavier games that you actually want to play more than, the easier, lighter card game fare? And what strategies have you employed?
I think for me, when it comes to games like that, what I want to do is I want to try to hype it up at another game night. Like if I have a heavy game that I want to play, I might talk about it on a previous game night that we're playing something else, gauge the interest. And if there are people who are interested in it, I try to like whip up a little bit of excitement and then declare or suggest, depending on who you're playing with, that we're going to play it on the next game night. And so everybody sort of knows there's no like surprise people get to the game night and all of a sudden you've got this like massive box or this book of rules. So you get people excited, you get people prepared, and then you just like make it the focus. Maybe it's not the only game you play, but it's like definitely a game that you play on that night. And that's how I've sort of done stuff in the past.
It's funny. It's like fake hype or whatever.
Yeah,
it's not on the top of the it's not on the top of the hotness, but it is in Mark's game group, like
Right.
hey guys, we got El Gaucho next week. Look at this.
Okay, have we all gone with 2 questions? So, I mean, I think we're probably okay, unless somebody has a...
I'm just going to say it, and then we can cut it if not. Like,
Sure.
it's that, like,
Okay.
The entire reason for this episode, okay? The entire reason is because I've always wanted to ask the question, but I've never wanted to be perceived as, not knowing. It's like, what is the one game that each of us is missing, right? Like, our board gaming tastes now, and we're just completely idiots for having not played blank. It's like, It's like there's an element of pride that I didn't want to ask it, but if you have an unepisode, the barriers are down, the hearts are open, you can ask it. It's like, Kellen, you are an idiot for not having played X. Like, I want like 17 emails
I love
that are
that.
just that.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. I would love to hear that. Like games that we have not mentioned or you haven't heard us talk about, but you think would fit into our wheelhouse and you just know that if we tried it, we'd love it. I love that question. Yeah, I would love to hear answers for that.
I also have a question that's kind of been like nagging in my brain like for a really, really, really long time. I'd love to get people's takes on this because it's kind of one of those things that's just kind of like, probably since we started doing the podcast, I just kind of felt I've never had a good answer for, which is when the enemies are trying to move towards you in Frosthaven and they have only one option to step on a trap or not to get closer to you, what do? I just have no idea. I've never been able to figure this out. Thank you all so much. You can answer the questions we've been asking on Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. You can find us all over social media on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you to Heartside for our intro outro music. What's on your mind, kid? Goodbye.
Goodbye.
It's the components are substantially different, which is interesting because the components are what make the game not work.
Yeah, we got to clap
hilarious.
so that I can
God.
mock Nealon on camera. Yeah.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Are we recording in here, Riverside?
We are not.
Isn't that the clap?
We should probably clap. We should probably,
Sure.
hit
Theoretically.
record, then clap is the most ideal way to do this.
That's one way to do it. But
3,
we don't
2,
believe in God.
1.
Excellent.
You were going to mock Neela now?
No, I can wait. I can wait till his section.
Okay.
No, that is
turn the light real quick. I'll be right back.
good
So,
training, Mark.
We want to call this. And here we go. Hello and welcome to the Board Game Barrage podcast, episode number 271. No, that's not how we usually do it. How we usually do it?
Well, now it's perfect time for the slogan.
No slogan. No slogan.
slogan.
But no, it's usually the number first, right? Yeah. I can't remember now. Do we usually say the 271st episode? We don't do that.
Hello, and welcome to Board.
Welcome to episode number 271.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Yes,
right.
yes.
How
Jesus,
could
wow.
you forget this?
That's so weird.
completely
Like
blind.
270 episodes later, your brain just
Yeah, after like
melts.
it's editing 270 episodes.
If we had to remove hosting power from one of the three of us, who would it be and why?
If we had to,
If
I
we
mean,
had
I would-
to.
yeah,
Don't
I
answer
think
that.
I think it's funny because you say you're the foil. Yeah, maybe. I think probably Nealon as host, so you could keep your foil thing. I don't know. I would either nominate you or Nealon as the.
I think like reflexively, you work better when you're not the host. Not to say that you're a bad host, but you are the best person at not being the host. If that
Well,
makes
the funny thing is, I would have said Kellen as the would be the person that I would nominate as the host, but I know that he himself. You speak. Let me know if this is wrong. You think you function best as a foil, right?
I mean, don't tell him. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we can't let him know that this is all an act.
Which is kind of like a fun bidding game with a toy factor presence, which could have been good had it worked, but it doesn't.
Okay. Wow, he's in rage over here. He's dropping stuff. I wish you could all see this because he's insane with anger. He set his foot down on the floor. Okay.
Right. No, I know. That's our deep dark secret. If that ever came out, we'd be ruined.
By Pandasaurus Games, I also wanted to talk about Applejack, which is a Uwe Rosenberg game published by... I also wanted to talk about Applejack, which is a Uwe Rosenberg game published by... Oh my god, I've already forgotten.